Hello, everybody, and welcome to Career Expert Roundtable. I am Bill, the company's expert, and with me today, we have Abby from the Life Work Balance channel, Professor Heather Austin, and Ben from Ben Talks Talent. And we are doing a special collaboration. We are going to be talking about reactions to interview answers in job interviews, and we're going to just go from there. So, hello, everybody. How you doing?
Well, thanks for having us.
We're good.
Yeah, I think this is great. Yeah. So everybody here has their own opinions and experience with job interviews and job interview questions and job interview answers. I think we each have sort of different experiences and in slightly different capacity. But I think one thing that we can all kind of relate to is standard job interview questions. And so I wanted to talk about that today. We're going to react to some stuff. And as a reminder to everybody who's watching, this is an interactive live stream. So wherever you're watching this, you should be able to see the chat box. So get in the chat box and you can ask us questions. You can give your own answer to some of these questions, and we will be happy to discuss it and react to it and maybe kick it around a bit and go from there. So just to kick things off, everybody's favorite job interview question: what is your weakness? Now, there are several cliched answers to this. Has anyone ever gotten somebody saying, I'm a perfectionist, as a weakness? Let's kick it off with that. What's everyone's thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I'll jump in real quick. You know, I would say this is one of those answers that's classified to me as a non-answer. You sound more like a politician than authentic human who, you know, we all have strengths, we all have weaknesses. So I would say this is like the classic, you know, don't say this. That's not gonna, it's not gonna land with a hiring manager. It's just gonna seem, inauthentic, I guess.
Do you hear that often?
Reaction.
Do you hear that often? Is that something that you hear on a regular basis? People think that this is like original and clever.
No, I wouldn't say I've heard it frequently, but I've heard it. Like in 15 years, I've heard it a few times. I think thankfully there is enough information out there that has made it so people, you know, can answer this and navigate it a bit more successfully. You know, but I have heard it before, and it's just kind of a cringy thing, and it's tough because it's like the classic trap question. I don't love it, but it does get asked, and as a job seeker, it pays to understand how to like navigate this in a way that makes you seem like a real human. Who is still well suited for the job.
Yeah, I think a lot of people are tuned into the fact that this is kind of, it can be a trap you walk into. People are probing you to say a bad thing about yourself. And so I think a lot of people go into this with their eyes open.
Bill, I will say, I think another answer too is I'm too detail oriented. You know, I think those cliche answers, it's proof that maybe the candidate just hasn't done their prep work, right? They haven't gone in depth to prepare for the interview and just some of these common questions to know how to really answer that question.
Yeah. And I think the other cliche that comes to mind for me is like, I work too hard. I'm too committed to my work. And when hiring managers hear those types of cliche answers, they just roll their eyes and say, come on, we want a little bit more insight and self-awareness. Like, what's something that you're working to improve?
I care too much, you know, I'm just too nice, you know, that kind of stuff. Yeah. That strength is a weakness, right? That's the category, I imagine, right? Has anybody heard a particularly good or weird or bad answer to this? Anything come to mind on this one? First of all, is this, in you guys' experience, is this question always asked in an interview? Is this like always there?
I think there's like a form of this question. It might not be what is your weakness, but I do think a lot of hiring managers and recruiters are just trying to assess, does this person know themselves, you know, and are they willing to talk about maybe something they're not so good at, but how are they overcoming it? What are they doing to be better? Kind of like, what is their awareness of themselves? But it might not come in the what is your weakness question. But I think candidates need to prepare for some form of what can I say about myself in case some sort of question comes up about that.
Yeah, it's like going The conventional wisdom for me is you don't want to go off script. You don't want to start talking off the top of your head about something you didn't prepare for. Just dangerous territory, right? So you may not have prepared bad things about you to say, right? And I think this is a trap that I think a lot of people might fall into.
Yeah. Well, and I think that when it comes to this question, it's really understanding why the interviewers are asking it. And so I would say, like, the phrase, what is your weakness or what is your greatest weakness, probably isn't asked as often anymore. It's probably older question that has been asked, but they've started to reframe it into, like, tell us about a time that you experienced a challenge and what you did to overcome it. So they're really wanting to understand what areas you're aware of that you have to grow and develop. And we're all not perfect. So having that sense of self-awareness is really important and critical. And the hiring managers want to know that we are aware of those blind spots.
Would you ask both? Because, like, what is your weakness is kind of like, it's, what do you call it? It's not a star question. It's like, give me a trait or give me a weakness. Give me a quality or a tendency or something that you do. You're not necessarily saying, tell me a story about it. You're saying, like, just what is it that's bad about you? And would you ask, say, that question maybe in a different form, say, like, what's something that you're working on, or whatever other form that would take. But then later on in the interview, would you also say, like, tell me about a time that you failed, or, you had a big challenge that you're still in the process of learning how to overcome, or something like that, where you're asking for a star type answer, like a story. Would you ask both in the same interview? Have you seen that done?
Well, I probably wouldn't ask what your greatest weakness is just in general. Like, I think Abby is right. Like, that is a much cleaner, more appropriate iteration of that question. Like, asking a question where you can actually point to something specific, talk about how you handle that situation and how you've modified your behavior since, is like a far better. And I think if you get the question directly, what is your greatest weakness? It's probably from somebody who doesn't interview people that often. That is usually going to be someone who is inexperienced, doesn't do it a lot, and isn't probably like a great interviewer to begin with. I don't know how to say that other than that, but that's how I feel about it. If you're asking that question, you probably don't do that this often. So you still need to be prepared to answer it. But if I'm like a candidate, I do spend a little bit of time there, but I spend a lot more time preparing for question like Abby's, because you're going to have behavioral interview questions that are much more popular nowadays. They are much more common, and quite frankly, they're harder to navigate successfully. I think they can be pretty challenging for even experienced interviewers, because if you're not prepared to talk about something, you have to recall something on the spot, which can be really hard to do. But yeah, I wouldn't ask both in the same thing. I think there is a period of time you have to assess a candidate. And I wouldn't personally spend the time being redundant like that. That's just in my opinion.
Well, I think from a candidate perspective, and let me know if you all agree, it's our job as candidates to tell a story to the interviewer to let them know that we're the best fit for the role. So even though they might, let's just say, ask the question, what is your weakness? That's not a question that's really aimed at a star type response, but I still would frame it in that type of response, because I want to tell a story, to give some background, that context, that action that I've taken, the information that I've been given, and then the results that I've been able to achieve. So even though the questions might not be framed in a star format, I still would probably want to give enough of a response that it would be in that format anyway.
Mm-hmm.
That makes sense.
That's great advice. That's just like really great advice, I think, because people hear STAR and they think, oh, behavioral interview question. Tell me about a time when. That's when I'll use this. But STAR in of itself is just a framework to convey a message and not leave out important points. So you can use that whenever. That is really great advice.
So Abby made another really good point about telling a story. So that is like, and as Ben mentioned, you're using STAR just for the framework, but really it's building a story to show, here's what I've done, here's some of the tasks that I completed, but more importantly, here's the result or the outcome. Yeah. And so it's kind of like just building that structure for every story or every accomplishment, project, big, huge moment that you want to talk about in an interview.
Here's a question for you guys here. Like kind of like what Ben was saying, it's kind of a tool to extract what you're looking for, which is, you know, I want to know what this person is working on, what they see as their weakness. Now you could kind of take the direct approach and say, what's your weakness, right? Or you could take a slightly more indirect approach and say, tell me about a time, you know, where you were working on something. What do you think of the approach? And I've had people do this to me way back in the day where they make a statement and it's almost like they're wanting you to challenge it. They say like, I guess you're not very good at this. I've had someone tell me that when I was a candidate in a job interview like 20 years ago. And they just kind of sit back and they like expect you, they want to see almost what your reaction to that is. You know, have you ever employed that? Is that something you've even heard of? I'm just curious.
Bill, we talked about this a little
everyone.
I think we talked about this the last time you and I were streaming together, where it's almost like this, like the interviewer is trying to get the candidate off guard, and then that can almost cause this like waterfall effect of the candidate like starting to spiral and then say things they don't mean to say and all of that. I would say in most cases, I haven't experienced that as an interviewer, where we're going to kind of make those types of comments towards the interviewee or try to get them off guard. So I haven't directly experienced that myself. And I would say that if that does come up in an interview where an interviewer were to say that to me, hopefully I have the confidence and the courage to, you know, move that in the direction that is the direction I'm hoping it will go. So like if they say, oh, well, it sounds like you're really bad at handling conflict. Like, well, maybe in the past could have handled some things better. Here's what I've done to improve. So kind of wrangling them and rerouting them in the direction that I'm hoping that we can take this conversation rather than really wallowing in what I can't do well.
Okay, that makes sense. We have a question here. Let me see if I can put this up here. Hello, can you tell me any tips on how to stand out in a job interview? I'm trying to find a job which I could work remotely, billing specialist. However, whenever I mention the country I live in, I'm automatically not qualified. Okay, well, that's a couple of different things there, but does anyone want to react to that?
Yeah, those are two very distinct things. I think the being, you know, I don't want to say, you know, discarded as a candidate because of country, that's going to be challenging. I would say I would be very specific with how you're sourcing opportunities and trying to identify companies on the front end that are going to be open to that, because there are plenty of companies that are. In terms of how to stand out in a job interview, there are a number of ways to do that. But I think the things I would tell people to do, if you're looking for low-hanging fruit, and the thing that I would advise anyone to do right out of the gate would be to, one, familiarize yourself a little bit with the company so you understand the company, what they do, their mission, their background, that kind of thing. But really familiarize yourself with the job description to understand what is it this person's going to be doing on a day-to-day basis, and be able to talk to your alignment and address any misalignment. So when you're looking at a job description, typically the must-haves, they're ranked from most important to least important, what you're going to be doing on a day-to-day basis, and just come prepared to articulate how you've done those things in the past, and if you can quantify your impact. So if there are things that you've done that have made a substantial difference or an impact with a company, be propelled to tell like great stories regarding those specific responsibilities. I think those are the easiest things and the things I would do right away. If I was a candidate, I'd immediately go for that type of, and I'm sure everyone else here on this panel probably has a bunch of great advice for that too.
Well, I'll ditto what Ben said, and it's definitely doing your research before you start the application process, before you start submitting your resume, reaching out on LinkedIn to find those companies that will hire you in your current country. Because if not, you're going to spend a lot of time and a lot of hours applying for positions that you will get zeroed out immediately. And the time that goes into tailoring an application, tailoring a resume, tailoring a cover letter, or whatever that might be, sometimes it takes some time. And I would say the number one key would be find those companies that are willing to hire you right up front.
Yep, I would agree.
Makes a lot of sense. Yep, I agree. Yeah, definitely. No, I just, I find that that's a very popular topic, going back to the whole, like, what is your weakness thing? I think that, at least in my experience, you've got, tell me about yourself. Pretty much people are interested in that. Anything salary related, salary negotiation, what are your salary expectations? That's very popular. People are a lot of concern over how to answer questions about that. And then my understanding is that the third place is the weakness question, or any variant of the weakness question. How do I answer if people are asking for my weakness? And I know, I think, Abby, you're kind of a proponent of this. You want to just give a genuine weakness and talk about how you're working on it. In my experience, I kind of take a slightly different view. I talk about deflecting it more, because I've seen some people use that against candidates as just the way to eliminate them. I don't. Are there any other sort of approaches to like handle this or ask this question?
Well, Bill, let me go back to the other question that you asked earlier too, about if they're asking you or they're making a statement implying in an interview that, oh, you might not be good at X, Y, and Z. To me as a candidate, I don't know if that's a company, if they're approaching me that way in an interview, if I was making a video on this topic, I would say that's kind of a red flag, right? Because when you think about the interview process, you're super excited about the opportunity. You're pumped up to go in and tell them how amazing you are, and you're excited to learn about them. And if you get these questions that are kind of like negative, or they're not really building on who you are as a candidate or what your amazing experience is, to me, I'm like, okay, do I really want to work for a company that is going to ask me these kinds of questions? Right now, the weakness question, of course, that's fine. But anytime that they are trying to catch you off guard, and it's like, does it need to be that way? Can it be like a really positive, uplifting experience? So I would think that would kind of be a red flag to me.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I wish I could retweet. I don't know if streaming has like a retweet function, but I'd like to retweet Heather's answer there. I like immediately would be like, I'm a human. Okay. Like we can have a conversation about whether I'm qualified for the role without you trying to trick me or make statements like that. I have a video on YouTube, and it's like it's what I learned from my worst job interview ever. And I remember the hiring manager asked me, if I hire you in 6 months, what am I not going to like about you? In my head, I'm like, well, I'm really loud. So, I mean, probably a litany of things, but I'm not going to work here. Like, I'm not interested in your role anymore, because if you're the type of person who in the interview, when we should both be putting like our best foot forward, if this is the type of thing you're willing to do, and this is as contentious as you're willing to make this, I'm like, I think this isn't going to work between you and me long term. So I would counsel you as like a candidate, like just remember, be prepared, go in there, be prepared to like crush your interview, but also, remember, this is about you. And this is about, is this going to be a good long fit for you? And is that the type of person you want to follow? Because I wouldn't want to follow someone who says, hey, Ben, you're not good at detail. Tell me about how you're trying to fix that horrendous problem you have.
But that's the nature of this question, right? Yeah. I mean, like, Ben, I totally agree with you, and I would have reacted exactly the same way. I agree with Heather on this. It's a complete turnoff. The fact that someone would throw that in your face, and kind of you get a very negative vibe from it. So I totally agree, and that is the reaction that I had when I was in that situation. But isn't it simply like what you described, Ben? That question. In 6 months, what would I not like about you if I hired you? Isn't that simply a rephrasing of like, what is your weakness? It's maybe not the best phrasing, but isn't it really the same thing that they're asking?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of like a harsher rephrasing of an already like pretty lame question, in my opinion. But common. So yeah, I do agree, and that's why you need to be prepared to talk to it as a candidate. I'm just saying, for me, that's why I think it's important as a candidate to have several opportunities that you can compare and evaluate, because you want to be able to walk away. As a candidate, you always want to have the ability to walk away. And in situations like that, I think it merits serious consideration to walking away, because, nothing's worse than leaving a good job, walking into a new job, and then a month in going, I have made a terrible mistake. And I think that's like a candidate for like, hey, that could be the case here.
Yeah, it's interesting because you're pushing for something negative, and we can sugarcoat it, but And obviously there's such thing as people not having any tact and they don't do it very well. But I mean, I don't know. I've seen the opposite. I had someone who eventually did hire me, someone who owned several companies, and they hired me, and they were awful in the interview. They turned off a lot of people, and I know this because I asked other people in the company afterwards, and I said, "What was your experience interviewing with this guy that's our boss?" And they said, "Oh, it was terrible. I had a very bad impression. Like first impression was very bad, and then it sort of warmed over the course of the interview. They said some very harsh things up front, and then they kind of were focusing on more positive things afterwards and making me feel a bit better afterwards." And have you guys seen that, or have you heard of that, or have you heard stories of people talking about that in their interviews, that kind of thing? I guess not.
Well, Bill, I was going to mention, going back to the weakness or negative questions. I sometimes think what's worse in an interview is, okay, there's negative questions and things that don't keep it positive, but is an interviewer that is uninterested or just non-complacent, right? So we work with a lot of candidates to find jobs and land interviews and job offers at large companies. And it's so surprising how some of the largest companies have the worst interviewers and the worst interview process. And you're thinking, oh my goodness, like, can't you give this candidate who has spent, I don't know how many hours prepping, getting ready, landing the interview, can't you give them the decency of like your time of day, like not being uninterested in the interview, asking lousy questions like, what's your weakness? Not really listening. Like, I think that's even worse, is an interviewer that is just not engaged and could really care less to be there.
I agree. Yeah, it boggles the mind why people who do this would allow themselves to behave in that way. I mean, surely they understand the effect that they're having on candidates, especially candidates that are really invested in, they're taking it very seriously, and it's a big deal to them. And just the body language alone, you get this message that you're not wanted and people don't care. And that leads you to maybe conclude that you don't have very good odds of getting this, right? If people are not even interested in talking to you. It seems to me like that happens quite a bit. You're saying like in big companies.
In large companies, yep. Because I will get a full report from my folks about, okay, what questions did you ask? How did it go? And I will say a lot of times these types of interviews happen more first line, like maybe the first or second interview. I do think once candidates get closer to the job offer, they are interviewing with more senior level and people that might have more of an interest in them, right? But sometimes I feel like that first level of defense in the interview, sometimes these people are just kind of like doing a job. I don't know if they're vested in the company, and I'm not saying that's for every company or every interview, but I have seen that in the past. And that, again, would be like another red flag, is if that interviewer really doesn't care what you're saying.
Yeah, I agree wholeheartedly. I think that's a big thing. And like I said, it's very surprising to see that done.
Well, I think that when it comes to interviewing in companies like this, the ones that I've worked for, it's usually the people who are doing the hiring are the ones that are going to work with this person. And so they're already overworked. They don't have enough staff on hand. They're feeling like they don't have the time to invest in this interview, which is actually such a strange paradigm to take, because if I feel like I don't have the time to like fully invest in this interview to hire someone who will help me do my job more effectively, it just seems like the whole process is kind of broken at that point. So I wish that organizations would help with education for their interviewers and their employees who are going through this process, because at some point or another, it's likely that we as employees might be involved in an interview process. And so being really good at interviewing other people, knowing what types of questions to ask, why we're asking those questions, what questions aren't good questions, what questions are illegal to ask. All of those things are really important so that we can not only have a really great interview experience for the people going through the process of interviewing, but also to make sure that we find someone who's the best fit for our role.
It almost seems like people need an etiquette course. That's kind of my reaction. It's not that they say inappropriate things as like a regular thing, but the impression I get is that a lot of people just don't know etiquette. So it can be very unwelcoming to people. They kind of, you show up and then everyone's too busy to deal with you. And then they order you into a room and then close the door, and then you're waiting forever and you think that people have forgotten about you. And then they come in and then down to business. They don't even look you in the eyes. They just look down at a paper and, just like things like that. It's just very unwelcoming. And I think a lot of job candidates have horror stories of this, where you're already, nervous enough, and your self-esteem is kind of not where you would want it to be to begin with. And then you're confronted with this kind of experience, and it's just very unwelcoming, and it really adds to the stress of the whole thing.
And the thing that really gets me when it comes to this is like not replying to emails. So if I'm going to be putting in the effort to apply to a position and then I get zero response back, or I just get like a no reply type response, it makes no sense to me, because if I were to work for this organization, email is likely a normal primary modes of communication. And so they're probably going to expect me to respond to my emails. So it always does blow my mind when employers and like the recruiting people in general don't necessarily respond to applications. And it's disappointing because people feel ghosted. They feel like they put in all this effort and that it's not paying off. And it can be really demoralizing over time. And if we were to even automate it to feel a little bit more warm, I think that could be helpful for people.
Mm-hmm. I know that Abby, you're a coach. That's kind of one of the things and I know also that Heather, you're a coach too. And I believe Ben, do you do active coaching? That's you're also your main line?
No, I have my YouTube channel, and then I work in recruitment. So I manage a few divisions of like third-party recruiters.
Okay. Cause I was going to ask you guys, like I
have my own team of recruiters.
I know you've got a team. Yeah.
Things.
Well, in your experience, like, do you find that a lot of what you would have to do if you're doing kind of the coaching component? I mean, I don't do the coaching component. I feel that it seems like a lot of it, or a huge part of it, would be almost like being a therapist, sort of interpreting a lot of these signs for people and saying like, that was maybe less than professional if they did that to you. And it doesn't mean that, you're not qualified. Doesn't mean that, it's pessimistic or something like that. Do you find a lot of it is like that, or not? Am I just out to lunch here?
No, Bill, I will tell you. So I do not have a degree in therapy, but every time I do a coaching session, I'm like, I need to go get a degree in therapy, or I need to go become like a licensed life coach of some sort, because it literally, because there's a few things that I feel like candidates really suffer with. And one of them is confidence, right? And that, like, once we can build the confidence, that's, things can take off from there. But and then every session, I feel so drained. Like I'll do like a 1 hour session and I'm like, oh my goodness, like, I think I could go take a 2-hour nap now. And it's not always about the job search, the interview. It's like, there's so much more that goes into it. So yes, 100%. I think we all probably need degrees and training in therapy.
Well, and I actually do. I have my master's in clinical mental health counseling.
Oh, awesome.
And
there we go.
Abby.
It is exactly that. And it's, I actually chose to go more the coaching route rather than the therapy route, because I felt that it was a little bit more, just philosophically a better fit for me. But it really is that way. A lot of exactly what you're saying, this confidence building, people feeling like they're not good enough and the things that they're doing aren't working and feeling like they're failures. And so from a coaching perspective, when you're working with people for these interviews, it's all about really building them up and helping them see that they have the skills to do this job. They knew they had the skills to do the job when they applied. So how do you apply what you've done in the past to what you want to do in the future? And then it's really helping coach them through storytelling. How are they going to identify the things they've done in their past that will indicate how they're going to behave in the future to really show that they're going to be the best fit for this role?
Is it about like helping them to understand what's going on the other side of the table? Like, is that kind of, because I mean, I'm not a therapist or anything like that, as everybody probably knows from my mannerisms, but it's like, a lot of it, I think, I get the impression it stems from people not understanding the process, not understanding, like it starts with something very basic, like I'm qualified for this job. I applied to it and they didn't call me back. And, therefore I'm getting the message that I'm not qualified for the job and that it's hopeless for me to look for a job. Because, and of course that's incorrect, but it's because they don't understand maybe the recruiter is being inundated with like 1,000 applications for one job. And the odds of you, beating 1,000 people when put side to side, is very, very tough, so they don't see that. They don't understand what the process is. So therefore they derive the wrong conclusion from it. Is that kind of like what a lot of the maybe therapy kind of part is, like people don't understand and their emotions are going nuts or something?
I don't know if it's specifically that. It's more, getting education around the whole process is always helpful, just because when you have more data, then you can make more informed decisions. So I do think that is a part of the coaching process. I would say and coaching also isn't therapy. Like you should be going to a licensed practitioner for therapy. So that's like a big thing to keep in mind. But when it comes to like coaching people through this process, sometimes they just need someone to listen to their experience and to know that they're not alone, and that there are other people out there experiencing these same things, and then to have some like tangible action items to then put into place for future experiences. So instead of just applying to this job, going to an interview, and then sitting back and waiting for the person to come back to me, maybe I can be a little bit more proactive and send a thank you note after my interview. Maybe I can check in with my recruiter to see what the timeline is, if there's been any follow-up questions that I could answer. So it's giving people the power to take some of that into their own hands, which is really important, rather than just sitting back passively taking it.
Bill, I will say part of my coaching is kind of, as Abby mentioned, it's building them up, but also helping them understand that process, because a lot of them will say, I know I was the best fit for this position. This position fit me like a glove, right? And they had a contact on the inside that gave them a recommendation, and they did all the things.
Everything in their favor, yeah.
Yes, and sometimes, and I would love to hear Ben's opinion on this, especially since he manages a team of recruiters, but sometimes it comes down to, you might have been the best fit, but maybe there was something about this other candidate that maybe their personality clicked better, or maybe who knows what it is. And it's always telling them, you can't take it personal. But when they get that over and over, like a couple times here and there, it really starts eating at them. And that's again where, there's a lot more emotions involved, and that coaching component of, hey, don't take it personal. But I would love to know Ben's thoughts on what should they know about that back end process? That would be interesting.
Yeah, I would say, like, the first thing I would say is there are so many reasons why great candidates do not get jobs. Okay. So the first thing I would do is say, like, if you get rejected, like, feel it for a moment. Like, it's okay to sit with that and like feel like disappointed, but just know that you don't need to discount yourself or your abilities or what you bring to the table because of that. I mean, internal candidates get hired, referral candidates come in and get hired. You're talking about, there's a lot of people over the last couple of years who are quite like fantastic, who have been laid off. And then you as a candidate are now competing with these people. So, I do not love the reputation that recruitment has earned itself with the way it handles and interacts with people. There is an incredibly low barrier to entry, and that kind of continues to perpetuate the type of treatment of candidates that nobody who's actually built a career in this feels good about. Like, nobody loves that. But I would say, just as a candidate, do your best, prepare so that you can be the most effective version of yourself in that interview. But when you don't win, just know that it's not always because of you. There's a lot of great reasons why fantastic people don't get a job offer that they thought they like absolutely like nailed the interview. So I would say that's my initial like just reaction to it.
What would probably help me if I was a candidate would be hearing examples of why some qualified candidates had been rejected. And when you hear some of the ridiculous reasons, that like are totally like nothing to do with your abilities or your qualification for the role or something, that would just personally, I've never done this, but that would probably make me feel better. Be like, oh, it was maybe a reason like that, just something out of your control. There's maybe some internal politics or some recruiter or hiring manager has like a weird perception of what's good and what's bad in a candidate. That might make me feel a bit better about things. I just thought I'd throw that out there. That doesn't really go anywhere, but what do you guys think about the question? Tell me about yourself. Personally, I think like we were talking about, some people said their reaction to the question, what is your weakness? It's dated. It's too old. I think somebody mentioned if you use that question, maybe it's a sign you're not a great interviewer, something like that. What do you guys think of tell me about yourself? Do you feel that is dated, that's a sign of not a good interviewer? When the candidate walks into the room, the first thing the interviewer says is, so tell me about yourself, like it's 1950. What do you guys think of that?
Well, I will own the saying. Like I said, it's probably a sign of not a seasoned interviewer for telling me about your greatest weakness. I don't feel the same way as this. I feel like this is an easy, like, welcome to the interview conversation. And it's really a good opportunity for candidates to come in and prepare to tell a story of why you're a good fit for this job. Quickly recap how you got to this point in your career and why you were a good fit. I don't feel as it's as dated. If I walk into an interview and I'm asked this question, I'm going to see it as an opportunity. And I think the biggest difference is it doesn't seem nearly as confrontational, especially as some of the other ways it's been posed. So that's my initial response to that. I don't feel the same way.
Okay, that's fair.
I totally agree with Ben. It's more of just like a conversation starter. It's more of you come in, they say, how's it going? How's your day? Tell me a little bit about who you are. Tell me about yourself. It's kind of just like, I feel like it's that elevator pitch, that 30-second statement and granted, tell me about yourself. You might elaborate longer than 30 seconds, but it's kind of just getting an overarching theme of who you are, how'd you get to where you are, and why is this company a good fit for you? I think everyone needs to have something prepared in some way, whether they ask that question or not. You need to be able to, tell them a little bit. And I think I agree with Ben on that question.
Yep. And I would agree as well. I think tell me about yourself is the icebreaker of all icebreakers. It's a great way to have, a jumpstart into the conversation. I don't feel like it's outdated. Though I have worked with probably my last 5 clients who have gone through interviews, didn't have their interview start off with tell me about yourself. The interviewers just jumped into questions. And I think even that can be, somewhat streamlined. We're going to cut the chit chat at the beginning. But at the same time, it's a good way to start the conversation to make us feel a little bit more comfortable.
Did they make any chit chat before, or like this was their first interaction completely? Like they just launched into other questions?
Yes. So the interviewers kind of did like their little brief spiel and then jumped into questions.
Okay. So they did say something.
Yeah.
No, I'm totally in a minority here, and you guys know your stuff. No, I feel like, how can I put this? I feel like when I've walked into interviews, and this is like years ago, and someone says, so tell me about yourself. And it's like, it's almost like somebody starting a conversation by saying, so nice weather we're having for this time of year, don't you think? It's like, it feels to me, maybe I'm the only one in the world that feels this, but it feels like such a cliche. Like there's so many ways you could have opened things, but you choose this thing that everybody says in this very formulaic thing. I don't know. That's how it strikes me. I'm sure you guys all don't see it that way, but that's.
Well, I think a good interviewer, they'll have, if they're trying to strike up conversation, add an icebreaker. I don't know if they're going to say it exactly that way, but like if I were interviewing a candidate, I'd say, hey, how's it going? How's your day?
Yeah,
and then I would want to know a little bit about why they were there. Why are you applying for this position? Tell me a little bit about what brought you here today. So I think that prepping for that can encompass a lot of different ways, but I agree. It does seem kind of like, okay, you're just asking me the standard question, but I think a good interviewer will open it up in a more genuine way. And hopefully that helps the candidate express themselves better.
Yeah, I feel that this is, I mean, once again, I'm going out on a limb here and saying, tell me if you guys agree. But it feels like it's one of the most artificial exchanges that most people will ever have will be in a job interview. It's very crafted, very guarded, you know, everything has been rehearsed, everything. And, so, and the fact that you get a lot of the traditional questions, like fired sometimes without rephrasing them, just, in their natural form, I think that adds to that. And the odds of people being genuine, I think, really go down in my opinion. I don't know. I've just had a few bad experiences with it. That's reflected in my opinions on this stuff. But I mean, is that a common thing, or that's not really a common thing? Most people they respond well, and you get genuine responses to these things. I'm not sure.
Well, I think this question, like, tell me about yourself, can be our own worst enemy. Like, it can really turn us against ourselves, where we start talking about things that don't relate to the job. Mm-hmm. We start talking about, things that just don't make sense at all. And so having some strategy is really important to that. I think the way someone answers the question, tell me about yourself, in a job interview is not the same way they would answer it, if they were just meeting someone for the first time at a conference or anything like that. But though there are some similarities. So I think that the way someone answers it tells you a lot from an interviewer's perspective about how this person has prepared for this job, for this interview specifically, why they think they're a good fit. It gives you a little bit of context about who they are, what they're doing, what they've done to prepare for this, and then is a good place to kind of lead into additional questions. You can refer back to it if you want some follow-ups, things like that.
Yeah, advice on how to answer this question seems to really run the gamut. Like, I've heard everything from people saying, just, go into what you think it makes you and stuff like this. And then you get maybe on one end of a continuum, and then it gets a little bit more guarded and rehearsed. And then maybe on the other end of the continuum, you get stuff like I advise people to do, which is basically give your resume. Don't deviate from your resume, because I've seen people eliminated because they deviated from their resume. They said a new thing, and then, unbeknownst to them, the interviewer has a chip on their shoulder about that particular thing. And then you've eliminated yourself with something very innocuous. I've also heard people say, I want you to talk about something very specific in your answer to tell me about yourself, even though it's the most general question I could possibly ask. I'm going to demand you give a very specific answer. And if you don't say that thing, I'm sorry, it doesn't look good. I've heard all kinds of advice, and I've heard all kinds of ways of answering it, and it doesn't seem to be any real consensus. That's my opinion. Do you guys agree, or is there kind of another side to it?
Well, I like what Ben said. So Ben, I'm going to do a video on I'm going to change my 4-part formula to a 2-part formula. So he mentioned something about give him a quick rundown of where you're at, and then align that with kind of why you want to be there and what your career goals are. I think, so I have a whole entire formula that I have my people follow. But Ben, I like what you said better. If I don't remember, do you remember what you said? Because it was really, whatever you said about answering that question was awesome.
I mean, the way I view it, and I think there's a lot of ways to view it, but the way, like, in the videos I've made about it, and like the way I talk about it with people is, you want to give people a quick, step-by-step, briefly overview your resume up to this point with what you're, and then end with where you're at. And then you want to say why you're a good fit for this role. How has everything you've done and everything you've experienced up to this point positioned you to be an ideal candidate who could do this job effectively? And to me, that's how I think the ideal way to answer it. And I think you could probably go a lot of ways, and there's other things you can include in. And I know there are people who are like, well, I wanted something personal. But I also think, at the end of when you give that answer, if they want something personal, say, well, what about personally? And then you can give a bit. But that's how I would do it. If you said, hey, Ben, gun to your head, best way to answer this question, go. That's what my 15 years of recruiting tells me, do this. And I will say, when someone nails this answer, when they come in and they just absolutely crush it, I just know they're going to have a good interview. Because if they are ready to articulate their value proposition so effectively and tell me about yourself, I'm like, oh, they're prepared. They're about to crush this thing. I mean, this is about to go really well. So anyway, that's how I would answer it.
That makes sense. Anyone else want to take a stab at that? I think that's good. I mean, this is asked as an icebreaker, right? But does the content of what people say matter? Like Ben, you just said, when someone sells themselves and they answer, tell me about yourself with, say, your value proposition. Like you say, I'm basically a fit because I've got this, I can bring this, I've got these traits, I got these skills. That's why, I'd like to be in this role or something like that. Do you base like your evaluation on the client on what they say, or is it used just sort of get the conversation going and then you ask more specific things to probe for stuff? What's your sort of attitude of the purpose of that question? If I can ask.
I mean, I think it could be a little bit of A, a little bit of B. Sometimes it is just an icebreaker. And, me as like an interviewer, I would never hear the answer to this and like, oh, they didn't nail the value proposition. They didn't stick the landing. They're out. Like, I'm going to work with them. I'm going to talk to them. It's my job as an interviewer to uncover, would they be a fit for this team? And would they be highly effective as this role? So if they don't say the perfect answer right away, like I'm not knocking them out, but it is a plus if they're able to like tell me a bit about themselves and then also why they're a good fit, for the role. I think every question matters, right? Like to me, it would be very hard to lose the interview on this question. If you said like, well, I'm an arsonist, that probably you're going to lose the interview. But if you just tell me about yourself, you're not going to lose. I'm going to probe more. I'm not the type of person who's like, hey, if they don't check this box, we might as well close the laptops and, go watch Netflix. Like it's not going to happen. Like I will probe
I think that's a very mature way of looking at it. I think that everyone should have a response similar to that. No, part of the reason I ask is because I don't know what you guys' experience has been, but like on my channel, my most popular video is where I talk about telling you about yourself. I don't understand why it's so popular. It was like one of my early videos, but I regularly get comments on that video and they seem to come from recruiters or interviewers because they say, I've been interviewing people for X many years. And if you don't say this, sorry, deal breaker or something like that. Like it's these very specific things. And these never occurred to me before, but I get a regular stream of these in reaction to that video and that question. Have you guys ever had that kind of feedback, like where people are taking that question really seriously and, they look for very specific things?
Yeah, I will say that. So that topic is like probably the number one most searched topic on YouTube in terms of the career content space. So I think, and then again, you're always going to get like Ben obviously sounds like an awesome recruiter that's not going to be a jerk, but you get a lot of jerky people out there that they will say things because they have a very strong opinion and maybe that's how they would do it, but they're not going to do it like Ben and his team or maybe some other recruiters, right? So I think you kind of have to take it all with a grain of salt. I think, you want to prep as much as you can for that. I do also think interviewers are really just trying to get a feel and tell me if you guys think differently of the person's personality and how well they can speak about themselves and how well they can explain their accomplishments and their achievements and how well they can really show that they're going to help that company in the future do X, Y, and Z. So really these questions are kind of just like nuances, right, to the whole process because they're really just seeing, are you a good communicator? Can you tell me some of the great things you've done? And what are you going to do for us in the future? Right. And then I think the rest is kind of like hearsay.
That makes sense.
There's really no right or wrong way to answer any question, like based off of who you're talking to, your own experience. Like even Ben's funny example of like, I'm an arsonist. Like now that I've got your attention, I'm actually not, like you could really weave that into some weird response.
Hey, if you want to stand out, that's actually a pretty good approach.
Yes. So there's really, if people are watching on YouTube, trying to get advice from people on how to answer these types of questions, you're going to hear the gamut of all of different people's opinions and ideas on how to answer it. And then you go through the comment sections and then you'll see the keyboard warriors out there saying you absolutely need to do this. You can never do that. So really there's no tried and true right way to do it. It's really what is going to work best for you, the industry that you're in, because there's lots of nuances based off of that. And so you got to find the thing that works best for you.
Mm-hmm. Agreed.
For the other big question that people want to know about, which is salary type stuff, right? That question comes up inevitably at a certain point. Maybe I'll just get everyone's opinion. Like, how would you advise people to answer that question? Should they give a number? Should they completely evade the question? What does everybody feel about this?
I'm waiting for Ben
I just
to
want to
go.
start by saying it took us 50 minutes and 14 seconds to get here. It could take us way longer to talk about this question. I feel like this question not only has the most gravity when how you answer it. This question could cost you over the lifetime of your career hundreds of thousands of dollars of like missed salary, and like, you know, like it has severe consequence, and it's incredibly nuanced. And I've got several videos on how to discuss it. I'm sure Heather and Abby are going to give great advice too. I would say the one thing I would say is it is really important to be well researched, to understand like the market. I think that's really important. And I think it's really important to be prepared and be a like highly effective interviewer, so that they are impressed with you, because everything you do in the interview process is establishing leverage. And being able to command a great offer happens in part because of how appealing of a candidate you are. I think ideally they say the number first, not you. Like if I'm, you know, as a recruiter, you know, I'm going to ask you, okay, so what are you looking for compensation wise? And if you have a way to get me to say the number first, it's probably better. I've heard that advice, like whoever says the number first loses. But you also don't want to make it contentious. This is a really difficult topic, to be honest. It's so complicated and so challenging. So I'm going to shut up and let you guys weigh in a little bit. But I'd say being well-researched and a great candidate is where I would start.
Makes sense.
I would ditto what Ben said in terms of you need to, before you even go into the interview, you need to understand what you think that salary range could be. I agree with Ben. If you can get the recruiter to tell you exactly what that range is or what they will pay for that role. Now, there's so many counter measures you can take when you get asked that question, like, hey, once I get further through the process, I'll be able to tell you more about exactly what my expected salary is. I'm a big proponent of not giving a range, because when you do, they're thinking, oh, I could pay you on this lowest amount, right? But then you're thinking, hopefully they're going to give me my ideal salary. So I always say, have a number before you go into that interview. And hopefully you have that number before you even apply for the position, right? And you kind of have an idea of what it looks like. And then keep that number in mind and know that if they're going to offer me anything less, I can't take this offer, right? So you kind of have that ideal number in mind. And I'm all about just having the facts and the data before you go in and before you even apply for the position, because you can waste a lot of time and money just trying to figure it all out. And then you don't want to get to the end of the day and lose out on an opportunity. And negotiating salary and all that stuff, that's a whole, we should do another live stream just about that, because there's so many things that go into that.
Yeah, it's a big topic, definitely. No, that might be an idea for doing another one of these, definitely.
Yeah, well, and I would agree with both Ben and Heather that when it comes to negotiating salary, ideally you get them, the recruiters or the hiring managers, the employer, to give you the number first. You also have to be extremely well researched to know your value and what you're worth and what the market value is for the job that you're going to be doing. I live in Colorado, so Colorado has established a law where you have to post the salary range on all jobs, which I absolutely love. Mm-hmm. The hard thing about that is sometimes I'll post the entire range of like the person who's getting the lowest amount and the person who's getting the highest amount. And so it's not really something that's very effective for letting people know what the range would be. But I would say that if there's anyone looking for a resource on negotiating salary, one of my favorite pieces is from Never Split the Difference by Chris Voss. He's a FBI hostage negotiator, and he has a whole little blurb in his book about how you can do salary negotiation. So I'd highly recommend looking that book up. And I think you can even listen to some of the audio snippets on YouTube.
That's awesome.
Yeah, makes sense. Yeah, we should definitely, we could do that. We could do a thing on the salary. I fear it would be a little contentious, from my perspective.
Hey, those are the topics that work well on YouTube.
Yeah, it's the question is how much do you sort of like say opposing opinions when we're all trying to get into this together. But no, I've got a very sort of contentious attitude about that stuff. I feel that a lot of people think that it's about persuasion, and it isn't. I think that, I agree wholeheartedly with what Heather said about you need to know your position when you go in there. And, but it's very contentious. The two parties are not working together on that one. They have completely opposite goals. And so therefore, any kind of pretense that, we're working together on this is really more of a smokescreen in my opinion. But that would make some an interesting conversation if you guys wanted to go there on that one. But
well,
yeah,
I think when it comes to salary, you also need to know the total compensation, because the total comp package is so much more than just the amount that you're going to get paid. Mm-hmm. So I might be willing to take less in salary if the benefits that I'm going to be getting are higher. Maybe they're going to be matching me at a higher percentage for my retirement. Maybe they're going to completely cover all of my health insurance costs. So there's a lot of things that go into this like negotiation process. And while it's helpful to know what the salary range or the number is at the very beginning of the interview process, you probably won't know the total compensation until further through the process.
Yeah, there's also issues to do with if you're talking about total compensation and then what form it takes. The same item might have different perceived values for different candidates. So, I mean, I don't think a lot of 21-year-old candidates really care about their pension plan that much, whereas obviously if you're turning 60, that might be a big priority. So, I mean, there's so many principles. I used to teach a course in university on total compensation, and it was like, a university course. So it's like 3 months, but they barely scratched the surface. There's like so much there. And it didn't even go into like executive compensation where there's other components and there's all kinds of other things going on. Huge topic, but it boils down to, in a job interview, as far as I'm concerned, what I find interesting is what do people say when this gets brought up, and do you say the same thing if this is the second question in your first interview, or this is like the last question in your fourth interview? You know what I mean? Like there's a lot to it, right?
I think every situation can be different. To be honest, if I'm talking to a frontline recruiter and they say, hey, Ben, what are you looking for compensation? I'd say something like, that's a good question. For me, it's not the most important thing in my career right now. I'm really focused on growing and doing A, B, and C. But I'm open to an offer that's fair and commensurate with my experience. What is the range you guys are looking to pay? And that might be a tactic for deflection. I'd get it, where I might treat it just a bit differently if I'm talking to the decision maker. And I'm already established like leverage, and I know they are interested in me. I know I'm a second or third candidate. So it's at the offer stage or something. Yeah. Exactly. And I like countering is a whole thing that could be a topic where you could do 30 minutes on just talking about effective countering. So it's such a rich topic. And you mentioned like it can serve as a jump off point for it to be like a contention in the relationship. Like it could be contentious. Definitely. And that's another thing. Salary negotiation doesn't have to be like that. If you do it the right way, you can find that it's actually pretty amicable. But if you do it the wrong way, then you could really fracture the relationship from the start. So it is just like, it is a massive topic, I think, that is so interesting.
Yeah.
And important.
Yeah, exactly.
I agree with what Ben said, though, about when you go into that negotiation phase, it can be such a great, productive conversation. It doesn't have to be contentious, So if you think of the employer who they need to hire someone and they want to get that person in that spot as quick as possible, and maybe they are willing to pay them what that person wants, it can really be such an amazing experience for both the company and the candidate if it's the right fit. And if you don't do weird things, right? Like if they're fair, and I think it can be such a great experience.
Definitely. Yeah. I mean, like Ben said, every situation is different, and it varies by industry and it varies by situation. I mean, maybe like you said, Heather, maybe there's an element of urgency. They need to fill the role and they just or they've got it into their head that you're the lead candidate at that moment. So, the exact compensation is not the most important thing. They just want to get you, get this wrapped up and get you started, kind of thing. Lots of variables, a lot big topic. Anyway, for me, it's 4:00. It's been 1 hour since we've been doing this thing. So that's probably where we're going to start to wrap up for today. I see there's 37 people here watching this. Thank you for joining us today. Hopefully you got something out of it. If you have any questions for any of us, you can leave them in the chat right now. We're going to be around for another minute or so, but I'd highly recommend that you check out everybody's channel. Check out Abby's channel, Life Work Balance. Professor Heather Austin. There are links to these if you're watching this on my channel in the description box below the stream. And Ben has got his channel called Ben Talks Talent, interview coach, right? You got that there, interview advice. Check out Ben's channel. Ben's got some really cool high energy videos that covers a lot of this stuff. And there's a lot of great resources there. If you are looking to learn and up your game about how to pass job interviews, there's some great resources here. I'd highly recommend you check out Abby, Heather, and Ben's channel, definitely. Whew, there's a gap, there's a space. So thank you, Abby, thank you, Heather, thank you, Ben. This was awesome. Thank you for coming on here, sharing your insights, your years of insights into some of these questions. And hopefully we will be able to do this very soon. Thank you so much.
That was a blast. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.